Right, so hello everybody, and welcome to this talk. It's called Retrospectives Antipatterns, and then I added the subtitle Team Meetings That Don't Stock. And normally, when I have a retrospective, I always ask everybody to answer a question, a warm up question. And since it's a fairly small crowd today, I would like to ask those of you who want to share if you have any facts about octopuses. So if you have a fact about octopuses you'd like to share, please share now. Octopuses can walk on their elbows. You can also say it if you don't want to share it.
Oh, I thought they had more than one brain, but it turns out they'd have one brain, but lots of neurons. That's the answer I got from Googling it to check I wasn't being wrong.
Yeah, it's very good. So the way that I think about it is they've got 60% of their brain in their legs. That's the way I understood it.
And can't octopuses or some octopuses throw one of their legs at predators or confuse a predator by taking it, like kind of discarding a leg or a tentacle and have it wiggle as they scarper?
Wow, I did not know that.
I think so. I think David Attenborough told me, so I'm going to believe it.
Yeah, of course, sure. That's a very good fact. Great. Any more octopus facts before we start? Oh, good. Well, as you may have noticed, there's a picture of an octopus on the slide, and it's because I really like octopuses. So I have octopuses everywhere. I have them on my book, and I just find them extremely fascinating. And this talk is about retrospectives antipatterns, about all the things that can go wrong in retrospectives, and how you can make it better. So sometimes some of the advice is you're in this situation, how can you remedy it? How can you get out of the situation? But sometimes it's you're in this situation, better luck next time, right? So sometimes you can actually change it. You just have to make it different the next time. So in order to talk about what anti-patterns are, I need to talk about what patterns are. And in order to do that, we first need to go to hell. So this is a picture of hell as you know it. It's very hot. It's full of lava and flames, and there's the internal fire, and you're getting burned. Right? You all know hell. But do you know this Niflheim? So raise your hand if you know what Niflheim is. Ole, you should know what Niflheim is. Well, we've got a stealth Dane there who doesn't know. Niflheim is the Scandinavian hell. So Niflheim is a damp, cold place where it rains all the time. It's gray, and it's run by hell. And this is where you go as a Viking if you kill people in the wrong way, right? So if you kill people in the right way, you go to heaven in Scandinavia. But if you kill people in the wrong way, you go to hell. And Niflheim, I mean, and it's very cold and damp. And there's a reason for me telling you this. And that's because I needed, as an example, to talk about patterns and anti-patterns. So just to set it straight, pattern is an abstract solution to an often recurring problem. So you have some sort of context enforces a problem description, then you have a pattern solution, and that pattern solution gives you benefits and consequences. An anti-pattern is almost the same. It has a name, like a pattern has a name. So examples of patterns could be observer, composite, visitor. But anti-patterns, you have the same. You have a start with a problem, then you have an anti-pattern solution, and that anti-pattern solution is the solution that people often do. They make this solution, but the negative consequences are more than the positive benefits. And then in an anti-pattern description, you get also a refactored solution, which has some new benefits and consequences, of course, but more benefits than negative consequences. So that's the difference between a pattern and an anti-pattern, that the anti-pattern has an extra layer. Sometimes pattern can become an anti-pattern. So for instance, with microservices, it's a very good pattern for software architecture, But if you overuse the microservices architectural pattern and you use it in a context where it doesn't work with the people that can't code in that way, then it becomes an anti-pattern solution. And what you have instead of a beautiful microservices architecture is just a terrible monolith that looks even worse than it did before. So another example is that in the good old days when hell was invented, it was invented because people couldn't behave to have something that would scare them enough so that they would behave well. So the pattern was to create hell and scare people with that and say, you go to hell if you don't behave well. And then, of course, we tried that in Scandinavia as well. So we said, if you behave bad, then you go to hell and you're going to burn up forever. But unfortunately, in Scandinavia, it's really cold. So when we hear that, we're just like, yay, we're going to the beach and there'll probably be drinks. We love going to hell. Let's kill some people. So maybe that's why the Vikings got it wrong from the start. But so the refactored solution in Scandinavia is then to create Niflheim, because Niflheim is where we don't want to go when we've grown up in this gray, cold place. We don't want to go there after we die. So that's the difference between the pattern and the anti-pattern, and how patterns in some contexts can be anti-patterns in other contexts. So what is a retrospective? To me, a retrospective is a place where you share to the other people in your team what had happened. You share also how you felt about what happened, if it gave you energy or took away your energy. You also appreciate that things have happened. Sometimes you appreciate things in a good way. You say, that was great, or thank you very much for helping me. You talk about the good things, but you also appreciate that things have been hard for some people. And you say, okay, I didn't think it was so hard, but I can see that it was hard on you. And optimally, you would like to learn from a retrospective. You would like to, in the way that you share, in the way that you understand what happened, you'd like to learn to improve, to make the team even better. So Diana Larsen and Esther Darby made the book about agile retrospectives, and their subtitle is Making Good Teams Great. So even good teams can become even better by learning. And understand everything is to forgive everything. And I think that's one of the core things I think about in retrospectives. If you can understand the causes behind this, then you can forgive what happened and you can learn and you can grow from that. So this talk is revolving around a little story from a Danish IT company called Titanic AS, which makes reliable navigational software. And the company had some problems. Like there were some of these ships that sailed in the wrong places and sailed into icebergs. It wasn't very good. So the management, of course, decided that if we go agile, then everything will be perfect. So they put everybody on a Scrum Master course, and then they expected things to go smoothly and quickly and wonderfully. And Sarah was the one in her little team who really was interested in being a Scrum Master, so she became the Scrum Master and working with the little team of Renee, Peter, Kim, Susan, and Jim. And first retrospective anti-pattern I want to talk about, it's called Prime Directive Ignorance. And I will let you know after I've talked a little bit why I call it Prime Directive Ignorance. The point is that when Sarah was to facilitate her first retrospective, she read some books and articles about facilitating retrospectives, and she heard that there was something called the Prime Directive about everybody did the best they could, but she thought it was a bit too touchy-feely and hippie for the developers in her team, so she decided not to talk about that. So they started the retrospective. And unfortunately, in the retrospective, she heard things like, Peter's not doing what he should. We're all so busy, because the team had been working hard towards a release. And Peter had just been doing what he normally did. He came a bit late. He went home a bit early. He didn't work in the weekends. They couldn't chat to him in the evening. So they were really irritated with Peter because they had really been working so hard and they thought he had to pull himself together. Fortunately, during the retrospective, Peter decided to leave the room because everybody had been so hard on him. And now if only they'd known to ask Peter instead of just blaming him and shouting at him, if they'd known to ask Peter, what's going on for you right now? Is there something we can help you with? Do you need support in any way? If they'd tried to understand him, maybe they would have known that Peter is going through a divorce and he's really worried about his economy. He's really worried about his children, and that's why he wants to go home every day and he can't work in the weekends. But they didn't do that. They just said, well, what we can see is that you're not doing what you should. And the interesting thing about people is that they can understand that they themselves have some problems, and there's a reason for them being too late or for not working very hard. But when they look at other people, what they see is not just that those things are happening. What they see is that somebody's lazy or somebody doesn't want to work as much as they should. Now, Norm Kurth was the first to write about retrospectives, and I'll let you read this while I take a sip of my beer. Norm Kurth wrote about project retrospectives back when they were called postmortems, all of them, because they were after the fact, after the project was done. And one of the things that he wrote was the prime directive, which is this, that everybody did the best they could. The problem with that is that it's very difficult for people to truly believe that everybody did the best they could, because they know that sometimes they see people being very lazy, and they know that even with themselves, I'm not always doing the best I can. But the point here is to try to set that mindset when people enter a retrospective, that no matter what you saw in the last sprint or in the last month, people probably did the best they could, the resources they had at hand and the energy they had. So it's important to try to remember that mindset when you enter a retrospective, in order to not blame other people for what had happened. And the trouble with this is that sometimes when you are facilitating a retrospective, especially as an unexperienced retrospective facilitator, you want to make the people feel that this is very efficient and effective, and it's very hardcore, and we'll work with the problems and we'll come up with some solutions. And then you don't want to say, let's just pretend everybody did the best they could, because you're worried to say that. So the anti-pattern solution is to ignore the prime directive, which is why it's called prime directive ignorance. But if you want to refactor the solution, then bring the prime directive to the retrospective in one way or the other. It could either be on a whiteboard, or now when everything is online, it could be in an email, perhaps in the invitation, in the calendar invitation. Just remind everybody, we're not here to find faults in people, we're here to find faults in the system. And maybe if you think the wording from Norm Kurth is a bit too long-winded or something like that, then just say it in your own words. Just remind people that we are not here to point fingers. And it's a good thing to just remind people every time, because it is so really a part of the way that we're thinking, even from when we were children and our parents said, who broke that vase or who left the milk out on the table? We're very interested in finding scapegoats. And so it's something we need to be reminded of, to find the problems in the system instead. And sometimes you have to remind people during retrospective. Sometimes it's not even enough to say it in the beginning. Sometimes you have to remind people, okay, so everybody did the best they could. Can we agree on that? So that's prime directive ignorance. And you can see here that the poor fish is being blamed by the octopus, all the octopus's tentacles almost. So the next retrospective anti-pattern is called Wheel of Fortune. And the Wheel of Fortune is like a Wheel of Fortune in a Tivoli, where you roll it, and sometimes you win, but most often you don't. And I came up with that name because there's a lot of people doing retrospectives where they have perhaps a wheel like this, but it could also be 3 posters. What should we stop doing? What should we start doing? What should we continue doing? And then once they put up the stickers, then they're like, okay, so that's how we'll solve it. We'll just start doing that. That will be our action point. So let me give you some examples. So perhaps they say, we need more pair programming, we need less meetings, and we need to stop ignoring the pull requests. So if you want a quick and efficient retrospective, let's just do it in 20 minutes. Then you can say, okay, great. We want more pair programming. So 3 hours every day, twice a week, everybody should pair program. We want less meetings, right? We should only have stand-ups twice a week, and we don't want to have any demo this week, and stop ignoring pull requests. Well, let's just put it in some sort of schema, or put it in Slack so that you're reminded every morning. So that could be one way of coming out of that retrospective. Unfortunately, often the things that you see are not the actual problems. They're just the symptoms of the problems. So it's like spinning this wheel, that if the problem with that they don't have enough pair programming, if the problem really is that it's because they forget to do pair programming, then surely setting up a schedule for it will be the right solution, right? That will be what you should do. But perhaps the fact that they don't do pair programming is just a symptom of the fact that they don't trust each other, that they're afraid to show each other the code. Maybe it's because it's suddenly online and they don't know how to technically support this pair programming. And so then those are the things that you should change, and scheduling the pair programming won't work. And with less meetings, it's the same. You could cut away half of the meetings, but perhaps the problem with the meetings is not that there are too many, but they're not good enough. Maybe they don't have an agenda. Maybe they don't have a meeting facilitator. Maybe it's the wrong people who are invited to the meetings. Maybe too many, maybe too few. Maybe they don't have like a solution after the meeting. This is the wrap up. This is what we're going to do. And stop ignoring the pull requests. I mean, okay, if it's because they forget it, then it's a good idea to remind them, but there might be another reason why they're doing it. So what I'm saying here now is that the Wheel of Fortune, you could very easily end up not winning when you scroll the wheel. What should we do instead? What's the refactored solution? Well, the refactored solution is to remember to go through the 5 phases of a retrospective every time. Now, sometimes for a retrospective, I like to say that I should have 1 hour retrospective for each week I'm retrospecting over. But sometimes after 2 weeks, I'm okay with 1.5 hours of retrospective. But sometimes people say, well, if we can do it in an hour, maybe we can do it in 45 minutes. And maybe if we can do it in 45 minutes, we can do it like in 30 minutes. And then it'll end up being just, okay, right, we're everybody here, we're taking a round. Do we have anything to talk about? No. Great, that was the retrospective. Let's go home. But that's not really a retrospective. You have to go through these 5 phases. First, you set the stage. You're getting ready. What you're doing here is that you are making a trusting environment. And one thing that's very important for me to do is to make everybody say something out loud in the beginning of the retrospective. For several reasons. First, if they say something out loud, then it's much easier for them to say something out loud later. If it's online, then just this is a way of making them go on video and unmuting their mics so that they are part of this meeting. It's also a good way of getting rid of the brain residue, because they come from another meeting and they probably have their head filled with to-dos and things that they have to do tonight. And why was the wife mad with me this morning? I just don't understand what toothpaste is so important for. And so they think about all sorts of things, but having them just say something at the beginning of the meeting is taking care of that brain residue and making them focused on what you're doing. So your question could be silly, like tell me a fact about an octopus, but it could also be, what was the biggest success you had in the last sprint? Or tell me something you learned since last time. Another thing you'll do in setting the stage is that you will look at the action points or the experiments you decided on last retrospective and see, did we actually do them? And what was the effect? What did we get out of the last retrospective? Because the retrospective in itself is nice. It's about sharing. It's about team building. But to really get the full potential of a retrospective, you need to follow up on the action items that you decided last time, just to make sure that you're actually making your team better, that you're actually learning. If you have a specific theme for the retrospective, this is also where you say that. Sometimes we focus on process, sometimes we focus on learning, sometimes we focus on the testing, or sometimes we just have a general retrospective. The next thing is gathering data, where we look at the past. That can be done with post-it notes or virtual post-it notes. It can definitely be done with the stop, start, continue posters. That's not a problem in itself to gather the data there. The point here is to try to gather data in a way that makes people unload what they have experienced since the last retrospective. And sometimes it can be good for them to look in the calendar while they do it, so that they're reminded on what happened. And the next phase is the critical one. This is the one that the Wheel of Fortune is about. This is the one that a lot of people skip because it's difficult. Generating insights is trying to figure out what is the cause behind these things. which of these things are the actual problems and which of these things are symptoms of other problems. What are causing these things? It's difficult, and sometimes people skip it because it's easier just to go from gathering data to deciding what to do. But spend some time in this, even though it feels a bit awkward. And then you jump to deciding what to do, and you say, well, now we can brainstorm on what we should do differently in the future. What experiments could we make? What action points could we have? And I keep saying experiments because sometimes people don't like change, but they're okay with an experiment. We can say, we'll try this for 2 weeks and we'll evaluate. And if we like it, we might change, but after 2 weeks, we will probably stop it if it doesn't work. And that's easier for people to accept. And the last thing is closing the retrospective with a summary. It's really important that you sum up, okay, these are the things we talked about, these were the insights we gained, and this is what we decided to do. Because people's brains are scattering. People fall asleep or think about other things, so it's good to have that summary right before you leave. And also, it's very good to put some names on these experiments. If you've decided to do something about the meeting, or you've decided to do something about the pull requests, let somebody be responsible for that. It might not be Peter who is responsible for doing all of this, but it's Peter who is responsible for reminding the team, okay, this is how we do this now. So all these 5 stages are really important. And it can be good just to write these 5 stages as an agenda for any retrospective and let people know where you are right now. So this is a life cycle of any kind of meeting, not just a retrospective. And the reason why I added this is because this is the way I like to think about meetings in an almost like tangible way. So you start always a meeting, hopefully, with an agreement of the topic of the meeting. And then there's some divergence where we are argumenting and we are sharing ideas and we're saying, well, we could talk about this, or we could talk about this. Then we have the groan zone, which can, to some people, feel very unpleasant. And as a facilitator, you have to keep that groan zone open so that people are discussing and disagreeing before you can allow them to go into the convergence to the decision. And the trouble with the generating insights is that the generating insights is in this groan zone. And if you're working with developers or developer type people, then they're really experts in solving problems. So whenever they see a problem, they just go ahead and solve it right away. So they don't wait for any insights, they just solve it because that's what they're trained to do. So as a facilitator, you almost have to physically keep this groan zone open and say, no, we're not talking about solutions right now. No, we're not talking about action points right now. If you really have some action points and solutions, you can't stop from saying, put them on a piece of paper and wait. Because we want to keep this open, this discussion open, before we converge into a decision. So that should be the life cycle of every meeting, and definitely also retrospectives. Now, if you have to generate insights, there are different ways of doing it. This is a fishbone diagram, an Ishkenavi diagram as well, which is about finding different causes for a problem. So you write the problem as the head of the fish, and then the ribs in the fish can be different themes, and then you ask people to brainstorm on different causes relating to the people, to the process, to the price, to the product, or something like that. You can also have 5 whys or 5 hows to dive into finding one cause behind the problem, but the fishbone is more open. So that was the Wheel of Fortune retrospective. Now the next one is called Do It Yourself, where you can see that the octopus is playing cards with itself. And do it yourself is because often when you start facilitating, the Scrum Master will be the facilitator, and the Scrum Master will always be the one who's facilitating. Sometimes it's the project manager who's facilitating or the team leader who's facilitating, but it almost often ends up with being one particular person in a team. And that happened to Sarah as well. So Sarah heard some people saying the retrospectives are boring, they're a waste of time, we should have a better facilitator. And Sarah herself also thought, I would really like to get something out of these retrospectives myself. Because the problem is, since Sarah was the facilitator of all the retrospectives, she had to spend all her mental energy facilitating. So she had to think about the agenda, the 5 phases. She had to look at people's body language to see if somebody were bored or somebody were angry or somebody really needed to say something. The facilitator is responsible for making sure that everybody says something and that we're working towards the right life cycle of a retrospective so that we come up with actual action points in the end and that we generate insights and everything. So it's really a hard work to be a facilitator because you have to be so alert. So when you are a facilitator, you're not really part of the retrospective. You don't get to have a retrospective because if you started going into the discussions in the retrospective like the rest of the team, then you wouldn't be focusing on the body language on the people over there or the time. Do we have 5 more minutes for this discussion or should we wrap it up? And it's really difficult to play both roles at the same time. So what you can do, the refactored solution, is to either rotate it within the team so that some people are facilitating 1 week or other people are facilitating another week, or you could have somebody from another team facilitating your retrospective so that you can just be in the retrospective and somebody from the other team is facilitating, or you can get an external facilitator. So this is one example from a company that I worked in Denmark, where we had a number of teams and we had a number of facilitators. And then we had a shared document where all the teams who needed facilitation, they would say, on this date, we need a facilitation, and on this date, we need facilitation. And then the facilitators could sign up for saying, I can facilitate this day, I can facilitate that day. And then some of the teams wanted the same facilitator every time. Some of the teams wanted a new facilitator every time. It depends on the culture of the teams. Some teams want something new all the time. Some teams like to know what's going to take place. And that's a do-it-yourself anti-pattern where you end up always facilitating your own retrospectives and not getting anything out of them yourself. And I know that there are some people in the audience here who are facilitating for each other. Right, Moody and Ole, you're facilitating for each other. Yeah, see, they're nodding. Yeah, true. And they like it, right? Big smiles. Yeah. Yes, it works well for them. So actual real life examples. The next one is called disregard for preparation. And disregard for preparation is about all these online retrospectives. I defined the pattern before COVID, but now it's even more apparent that people need it. So you probably tried facilitating online retrospectives, and then you hear people saying, oh, is the retrospective now? I'll be there in a minute. I just need to go out of this other meeting. Or where's the link again? Because you always have some sort of shared document that you use for the retrospective. Or can you just chat the link again, please? And then sometimes if some people are sitting in the same room and other people are sitting in other rooms, there might be some small talk between them that other people are not part of. And they become like a cluster in the team. And we hear people saying, did we actually get a password for this? And how do I enter this link? You probably heard some of these things or experienced some of these things at an online retrospective or an online meeting. And the anti-pattern solution is to just disregard that it actually takes a lot more preparation for an online retrospective than it does for an in real life retrospective. You have to create the document and you have to talk to people over email instead of just going and talking to them over lunch. It's really difficult. And the refactored solution is different things that you can do. Send an email the day before to the people. Remind them, okay, tomorrow we have a retrospective. This is a link to the document. Please make sure that you can access this document before tomorrow. Sometimes you might even say, here is a link to the document. If you want to actually already start filling in, gathering the data about what has happened, you can do that. For people who can't really think on their feet, it might be nice for them to have access to the document the day before, and they can sit on their own and look at the calendar and add things to this timeline or send an email 15 minutes before the retrospective. Because when everybody is sitting behind their computers, they go from meeting to meeting, and then they suddenly realize, okay, now I have another meeting. Okay, now I have another meeting. But if you send an email 15 minutes before, remind them, go get a beer because it's retrospective time soon. And then remember to go to the toilet before we start, because people who are jumpy like this when they're in the retrospective, they can't really listen to what other people are saying, and they make really bad decisions when they need to go to the toilet. Not you, of course. Everybody here is calm and don't have that problem, but I know of some people who do. And then insist on video for everybody. And I know that's also a bit provocative and a bit contrary maybe, but there are of course some people who genuinely don't like being on video. For some psychological reason, they dislike it, it makes them feel uncomfortable, they hate it, right? And for those people, of course, they should not be on video. I mean, it goes without saying, you can force people to do that. But we're back in the problem and cause here again. I think if somebody doesn't want to go on video when you're facilitating, you could at least ask them why. Not when everybody's listening, but ask them afterwards. Because sometimes the answers that you get show you that it's not really the problem, it's a cause. The cause is different. This is just a symptom of another problem. So sometimes they say, well, I can't be on video because I'm driving while I'm having this meeting. Okay, big red flag. You shouldn't be driving while you're attending a retrospective. A retrospective is a place where you should listen, you should look at the shared document, you should be able to write things in the document. You can't drive your car while attending a retrospective. It could also be that they say, oh, but I'm in a very noisy cafe, so I can't really show my video because people will be there behind me and I can't unmute myself because there's the coffee machine. And again, I would say that's a symptom of a problem that you don't respect this meeting. Don't sit in a noisy cafe when you have a retrospective. Also because a retrospective should be a place of trust, should be a place where nobody can see if somebody gets mad or sad. Nobody can just look over his shoulder and see what's being written on the document. So you shouldn't do that in a public room. So I think that when I say insist on video for, let them know that you as a facilitator really need that feedback, that facial feedback, to know whether you should stop the discussion, to know whether you should ask people directly, to know whether you should make people go out in breakout rooms, or whether you should have a plenum discussion, or whether you should change the plenum discussion to talking 2 and 2 or whatever. It's really important. Make sure everyone is equal. So it could be that some of them are actually sharing an office and they might as well sit in the same office, go to the retrospective together, and then everybody else is just as satellites. But that's not very good, because I know that for the people who are together in the room, their communication is much better. It is enhanced for them to be together in the room, but they have a lot of communication that the others cannot follow. It could be that they're just a smile, just a wink, sometimes even just body odor when people can smell whether they are afraid or angry can be communication. And if they have that communication together and others don't have that communication, then they're unequal. And the sharing and learning experience is not as effective as it could be. Prepare a strict agenda and an alternative. I say that for every retrospective, that you should have an agenda and you should create an alternative, because sometimes when you gather data and you see, then you're suddenly like, okay, wow, we need to spend more time talking about this. So maybe we can't do this temperature check about that trust, or maybe, okay, we really need to make a temperature check about the trust before we talk about this, because it doesn't make sense to talk about this subject before we know if people want to share anything. And when you're doing an online retrospective, it's even more important, because you can't just draw something up on a whiteboard. You have to actually prepare another shared document that you have to send the link to. And I appreciate that sometimes in Teams you can now just yank out the whiteboard and share that and write, but you can't do that in all the different settings that you're working with online. And just don't record it. I know it seems like a very good idea to just record it so that, he couldn't be here today, we'll just record it and then he can watch it tomorrow. It's a really, really bad idea, because a retrospective should be a place of trust where people can share things, even the things that they might be a bit ashamed of or angry about or sad about. And if you're recording it, then you're just not getting that information that you need to improve this teamwork. So that's the refactored solution to the disregard. And you can see here that the poor octopus didn't prepare, and all the different fish are doing all sorts of other stuff instead of focusing on the retrospective. And I've shared that frustration. I've been that exact octopus at a retrospective sometimes. The next one is in the soup. Now, another retrospective, and Sarah hears things like, the boss will never allow it. We always discuss the testing framework. Why can't the retrospective help us? It's useless with these retrospectives. We don't really get to talk about the real problems. We just talk about the different coffee in the canteen or something like that. And we never get anything changed. So the problem here is that sometimes you are discussing things in a retrospective and you're spending a lot of time discussing something that you actually cannot change. You're spending time discussing things that other people are responsible for changing, not people in the team. If you do that, then you just waste a lot of time, and it just becomes a moaning session where people are just complaining about things that happen. Daniel North calls it a retrospective, where people are just, and it can be nice to get some air out, but it's not really helpful in any way. There is actually an activity that can help in this situation. I call it the soup, and some people call it circles of influence. I learned it from Diana Larsen. And it's these three circles that you've possibly seen before, that we have the innermost circle with the things that the team can do something about. The next circle are the things that the team can influence. And outside that, we have the soup. And then you can use this activity either after gathering data, where you have a lot of post-it notes, and then sometimes you notice, it looks like there's a lot of these post-it notes that actually are about things that the team can't do anything about. Sometimes you can see it immediately, that there's a lot of things that are outside of their realm of influence. And then I sometimes just say, well, let's just make a soup activity. Just take all the post-it notes, and then the time, let's put it into this. And then for each of them, they take one, and I say, okay, is that something you can do something about? No. Is it something you can influence? Yes. Then we put it in the influence. And sometimes it's in the soup. And I use this sometimes for teams that don't want to take responsibility. There's some teams that start a culture where it's always everybody else's fault. And if I have a team like that, then I definitely take the soup exercise, because then when almost all the post-it notes are in the soup, I say to the team, well, let's just stand back or lean back and look at this picture. What do you see in this picture? Just let them look at it. Just hold up a mirror in front of them and say, what do you see here? What do you think this looks like? Then they sometimes get the insight, oh, it looks like a lot of the problems what we're talking about is actually in the soup. We can't really do anything about these problems. And I think that's very efficient for a team to acknowledge that, okay, maybe we are focusing on things we can't do anything about. Let me give you some examples. So I exercise, as I said, after gather data, but I also sometimes use it when we are deciding what to do, when we've brainstormed things to do. So you can see here's it's like a mixture of things from gathering data and from deciding what to do. So the communication with the testers is bad. It's a problem in the gather data section. Code review all major changes. That's a proposal that's made in the deciding what to do, and change the location of the company is also something that was made in deciding what to do. And then when you look at it like that, you can say, well, the things that are in the do, we can do something about that. Let's make the action points for that. The things that we can influence, maybe we can make an action point to contact some people, to send an email, to call them. And the things that are in the soup, we need to learn how to accept it. And in Denmark, we say, oh, please give me coffee to solve my problems, red wine to not care about the problems I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference between these two. And I think that's valuable, because even though there's something that they continue to talk about, they continue to bring up, and you cannot change it in a retrospective, it's also valuable to just accept that. Just accept you cannot change this. And then some people might quit the company, but at least they should stop complaining about it. They should just accept this is how it is, and how can I adapt to this? When you start talking about the different things in the soup diagram, the interesting thing is that sometimes you can actually change where they are. Again, the thing about symptoms and problems and so, for instance, it could be that instead of just saying the communication with the testers is bad, maybe we can move closer to the testers if we're still in the same building. That might influence our cooperation. And we can't change the location of the company, no, but maybe we can come up with reasons for a local hub and say, well, maybe we can have a local hub in our country or in our city. And maybe we just have to accept that we can't change the location of the company. So for me, the soup exercise is really valuable, and I use it quite a lot. So that was in the soup, and is the octopus, which here is like the whole team is trying to lift something that it cannot lift because it needs somebody else to lift it. The curious manager. Yeah, so I often get asked, should the manager be part of the retrospective? Because they definitely are curious. They want to be part of the retrospective. They want to listen in on it. And they're often the ones who are, well, suggesting, should we not record it? And I'm not saying this because I hate managers. Managers are wonderful. They're important. They can be lovely people. They have to understand retrospectives, and they have to understand what's at work at a retrospective. So sometimes we hear the manager say, I should attend the retrospective. I'm curious about what's going on in there. And the manager wants the online retrospectives to be recorded, and the offline wants to have a summary. Could we just have a summary for each retrospective? Who's taking notes this time? Or could we have a meeting after the retrospective where you tell me what happened? So that's Sarah is being asked by the manager to accept her in the retrospective, and Sarah accepts to have the manager in the retrospective. And it doesn't really work for Sarah and her team because the team members are worried about the manager. They're worried that she might hear something about them when they're talking about what went wrong and what they're afraid of and what they don't know how to solve, that they'll be seen as less valuable workers. So the problem with this anti-pattern solution is that if you allow the manager in the retrospective, it can have some consequences that people are not opening up and they're not sharing what is important. So my rule of thumb is just say no. If you can hire or fire, you shouldn't be part of the retrospective. Ask the team if, okay, so these 3 post-it notes, could I bring this to management? Could I point the management attention to these 3 post-it notes? Maybe it was something in the soup. So maybe I could take this and show it to the manager. I don't need to tell the manager who came up with this, but I could show it to the management. So, but ask the team what they think about it. And also ask the team if the manager can be part of the retrospective. Because if we look back to the in the soup exercise before, I think you can imagine that if you had the manager at the retrospective, then the circle of do and the circle of influence would become larger. If they would actually be part of it, all the skills and the power that they had would be part of this retrospective's do and influence. So sometimes if you see a lot of things are about the manager or the tester or the architect or another team, then it can be a good idea to invite these people or representatives for these people to the next retrospective, just to widen the circle of do and the circle of influence. And also I say the manager is not allowed to just listen in on the retrospective. If they're there, they share. So sometimes managers say, I'm just going to sit here and listen. I'm not going to take any time. And I say, well, that doesn't work in my retrospective. You can't just be a fly on the wall in my retrospective. You have to share. Because if you don't share something, then it's more difficult for other people to share. In this retrospective, everybody shares. So they can't just sit in. I also have a manager ask me afterwards, oh, could you please tell me what's happening? Because I know you're so good at making people talk about problems. So if you could just ask them about this and then tell me what they said. And I said, well, that's the problem, right? The reason why they talk to me is because I don't talk to you about it afterwards. So I can't do that, right? That would be shooting myself in the foot. So that was a curious manager. Now the last anti-pattern that I want to talk about is called the disillusioned facilitator. And you can see here the facilitator is crying and the other fish are laughing at the facilitator. This is a very sad story. So sometimes you come up with an activity like everybody should say what the last meal was, or everybody should draw pictures of what the last sprint of, or everybody should make a Lego figure of what they expect the product to look like, or something like that. And you hear people say, this is ridiculous. Do you really want us to do that? And we're actually grown-ups, and there's whispering about waste of time in the hallways, and the facilitator is asking, how do I get them to do this? Sarah really wants to have fun, bonding, team-building retrospectives that are not boring and lack energy. So she's reading up a lot about activities online, and she's really interested in finding out how to make them more alive. But sometimes she hears about something, maybe she goes to a conference like NDC London, and she hears somebody saying, oh, you should use the soup. And then she's like, oh well, Aino says I should use the soup. I'm not so sure about that, but okay, maybe I'll do it. And then, of course, it all falls down because she can't really express why it's so important. And so the three-factored solution is that once you think about having an activity at a retrospective, make sure that you believe in it yourself. Make absolutely sure that this is something where you know why you're doing it, you know what they could expect to get out of it, and you know how to get out of it if there's a problem. Let me give you an example. I once facilitated for a new team. Only men, but that was probably not part of this, or maybe it was. Well, forget about that. It was a new team. And they had been very, very negative. They'd only been talking about the negative things. I always want to talk about the positive things as well and say, okay, so how can we improve this? How can we maximize this? How can we make more fun, more communication? But they really wanted to talk about the negative things. And they really wanted to sort of dive into this and spend time on that. And oh, it's so terrible and problematic. So I thought, okay, I'll end this on a high note. So I'll end this retrospective with an appreciation game. So this was before COVID. I made them all stand up in a circle. This was probably in my first year of retrospective facilitation. So I made them all stand in a circle, and already there they're like, standing in a circle, really? No. Okay, but they did it, right? And then I said, okay, I have this little ball. This is an octopus, but back then it was a ball. So I have this little ball, and this is an appreciation. And I put on my happy face. And I said, so what happens is that I throw a ball to somebody and I appreciate them for something, and then they catch the ball and they find somebody else they want to appreciate for something, and they throw the ball at them. And then it's like, I had expected it to be a very happy ending for this negative retrospective where they would appreciate each other instead of nagging about each other, right? So I threw my little ball to one of the people in the team, and he caught the ball and looked at me, and I said, so now you find somebody you want to appreciate, and then you throw the ball. You can imagine young Aino saying that. And he looked at the ball, and he looked around at all the team members, and he looked at the ball, and then he did like this. And then he looked at me again. And I was like, oof, I just had this stone in my stomach. Because I was sure this was a good idea, but I hadn't thought about what I should do if they didn't want to do it. And I think it's very important to think about, okay, what if they refuse? And I think now, with my experience, what I would have done is that I would have taken this as a gift. I would have said, okay, interesting. You don't have anything appreciative to say about any team members. And maybe I would have asked others if they did have anything. Maybe I could have asked him if he had something that he would like to ask them to improve, something to work on, something to be more of, or anything like that. I think I would have spent more time trying to figure out what it was that he actually told us with that gesture, instead of just, as it happened, becoming really ashamed, really hating myself for being such an idiot, and stopping the retrospective. And I was never invited to facilitate for them again, and I will never forget it. So to believe in it yourself, make sure to tell them why you're doing this. Don't just say, oh, we'll have this game. But, well, for some people you can do that. Some people love that. But for some people, you have to say, well, we're doing this because we want to share. We're doing this to build trust. We're doing this to learn, or something like this. And make sure to debrief afterwards. So, for instance, like after the soup exercise, make them look at it and say, what do we get out of this? What insights do we get? What do we learn from looking at this? And then be kind to yourself, because this is difficult work. It's really difficult to facilitate. And you are so on the line for all sorts of critiques and weird questions and people saying, oh, it was worthless. So be kind to yourself. You did your best. The Prime Directive holds for you as well. You did the best you could with the resources at hand and what you knew at the time. So the disillusioned facilitator is the last anti-pattern for retrospectives for today. So good luck with your retrospectives. And of course, I'm doing this to sell my book, but we don't have to look at that right now. And now there is a few minutes for questions if you have anything. I've opened the chat so I can see if you write anything, but if you say something, that would also be great. And if you don't have any questions, I'll just sit here and drink my beer because I think I've earned it. So cheers.
Thank you, Aino. That was great.
Thank you very much.
So it's interesting that you say no managers at Retros, because I think for the entire time I was at Xamarin and then again at Microsoft and now at GitHub, we, at least in Ahu's office, we always have the manager in the meeting.
Yeah.
And I wonder how it would change.
Yeah.
I think maybe the rule of thumb there is I'm not sure they can hire and fire us. So maybe that works. Or they're so low on the food chain that they're kind of equal with us.
Yeah, I should have said that. It's a good point that you're making there. And sometimes, well, in your Aarhus office, you were like a little startup who had merged into a bigger company, right? And the point with small startups is that the manager is part of the team, genuinely part of the team, and has been since the beginning. There might be some newcomers who weren't there when they started as a team, but he or she is part of the team. So what I see for startups is that the manager can easily be part of the retrospective because they're part of the team. But once they become like away from them, longer up in the food chain, as you say, then it's not a good idea. And so I've had organizations where I asked the team, would you like to have the manager? I don't think you should have the manager. And they say, of course we should have the manager. Are you stupid? We need the manager here. Otherwise it's not a good retrospective. And I was like, okay, well, we'll have the manager, not a problem. And then sometimes I make an anonymous vote about it as well. And then somebody is saying, well, actually, I would feel better if the manager was not there. And in those cases, what I do as a facilitator is I say to the manager, well, the team wants you there, but I'm an idiot. And my stupid rule of thumb is that I don't want managers in the retrospective. So because of me, you can't come. So I take it on me to say no to the manager. But there are genuinely some teams who really want the manager to be there. And it's great. As I said, for the soup, you can see how the circle of influence just gets a lot bigger if the manager is there. So if they trust the manager and they feel okay with the manager, then it's definitely a good idea. But my rule of thumb is just to say no, because I've seen so many unfortunate situations.
How about, we agree that we shouldn't record retrospectives, but one thing I've seen in different times when we're doing online retrospectives is that, for example, we're using Wunderlist or some other tool for making notes, and then quite often people want to freeze the results of this board and then make that public to, I don't know, management or whoever is interested. Yeah. How do you handle that? I guess it's not a good idea, because what happens at the retrospective stays at the retrospective, I guess. But
yeah, and that's the point. It's like the Hollywood principle, right? Or the Las Vegas principle. Oh, I was thinking about something that happened in Hollywood, but it's the Las Vegas principle. So I think there's a huge difference in whether you're doing like a post-mortem on a problem. Yeah, Bojack. Yes, exactly. There's a huge difference between if you're doing some sort of post-mortem for the whole organization or company to learn, Like I know that some big companies, for instance, Google, are making postmortems. If something goes wrong, the team makes a postmortem and they share that publicly to the whole organization so that the whole organization can learn from that, which I think is brilliant and very good. But when I think of retrospectives as a trusting environment, which is about team building, which is about getting to know each other, because the trust is created by relation and reliability, and that relation is a personal relation. You need to have a personal relation to trust somebody. If you take a moment to think about people that you trust, I'm quite sure that you have some sort of relation. You know something about them, and they know something about you, and then you have some sort of reliability that if you ask them to do something, they'll do it. Otherwise, they'll tell you that they don't. So I think that building that trust and building that sense of a team, for that you should not share everything. And taking those pictures of all the notes, I don't think is a good idea. And if you do it, then it's definitely something that you should all agree on in the beginning. And here comes like the problem again, like with the manager. If you ask everybody at the retrospective, are you okay with this? There'll be some people who feel so bad about it that they won't even be able to say, I don't think we should share it. So you should really be wary about that and ask people anonymously if that's okay with everybody. And also, I think that for some of the people who are taking notes on retrospectives and saving all these things, they do it because they have this intention of going back and looking at it, and they probably won't. So what I do now with online retrospectives, something actually that Moody helped me with in the beginning, is that when you have an online retrospective, you have a link to the former retrospective so that the team can go into the document for the retrospective, and then they can follow the links back to the earlier retrospectives. But again, I think it's something for the team, not for everybody else. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And I want to say that the illustrations are made by a Serbian guy called Nikola Korac. So you can actually hire him to make illustrations to your home pages or books or anything like that. He's really good and easy to work with. I'm just going to write his name here.
I'm glad you brought up the managers, because now we're using a service now for retrospectives because we are quite pressed for time, and it is a lot of pressure when you're the facilitator to come up with the theme and manage the time, etc. But it occurs to me that I've maybe made the permissions a little too wide, and that there are people who maybe shouldn't be seeing the retrospective.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, cute. Somebody has a baby. It's been a while since I had that sound. So, wow, I'm completely thinking about babies now. What did I want to say? I wanted to say something extremely intelligent. Let me see. Yes, I think that especially for facilitating retrospectives with developers, and I'm going to do some harsh generalizations now, is that developers want to appear intelligent and serious and grown up and hardworking, and it can sometimes be a struggle to make them accept that they are human and they can play, and it's okay to do something which looks, and say, I don't want other people to know this about me. And that in itself can be a struggle. So going through that facade takes, in my experience, some time to make them accept that they can say that. But yeah, I think that the time is almost up. So I want to just really appreciate all your questions and taking your time with me. And it was a pleasure. And good luck with your retrospectives.